He grabbed the arm that held Rysandria. "This girl said no to you, governor." With that, the man rose from his chair and pushed the sailor's arm back off of him, freeing the lady in the process. Now it was confirmed in her own mind here, the evidence of why she didn't venture to such places, especially alone, and all to try and do some good, she thought ironically. With her hood up and glasses on, she had looked much older. But now the reality was clear. She was barely in her 20s. Perhaps 19. The sailor put two fists up in a fighting stance and continued, "This girl has already told you she isn't interested, and if your ears need more, I've two willing fists for 'em." The drunk man looked down at the lady, trying to catch a bit of leg on display, and realised that he could see none. Perhaps it was the robe that was covering those nice legs up like that. What a shame. But then why was she in robes if she was a bar wench? He thought. "How was this going to play out then, friend? Your choice." The sailor's words shot through into the man's skull and made him retreat backwards until the rear of his foot hit the door. At this guiding aid of self-awareness of his placement, he turned swiftly around and left through the door with a forward stumble. The sailor made to leave too. Rysandria stopped him with a word. "Wait!" The salty sea dog looked around at her, smiling as she made her point. "Don't follow him and continue this fight. It's not worth it. Let him go home and sober up. I'm sure he'll regret it." A hearty laugh left the sailor's belly. "Ha ha 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 ha! Oh no, lass, you don't understand, do you? That man is my best friend. I'm going to see he goes home all right." "But I don't understand." "Ah, well, it's like this, miss," he explained. "I'm sober, and he is drunk. But when it's the other way round, and I'm acting like he was here, and he's acting like me, say, so it's how we look after each other when we're too deep in it, so to speak. Accosting a shallion holy type, now that's pretty deep right there. Of course, being the hero to some girl has its advantages too sometimes, eh?" And with that he winked at her. Rysandria crossed her arms angrily. "You both disgust me." The sailor laughed heartily as he left the bar, stepping outside into the pouring rain. Tordrad looked across with a mixed stare of relief and disappointment. On one hand, he would have enjoyed a good bar fight, but he was also glad that it now wasn't going to interrupt his drinking. Maestro threw a dart which missed the board and fell short, sticking into the wall beneath it. Tordrad's good time was spoilt at seeing this, thinking to himself, "Perhaps I should get you bow to fire them with." He liked his own joke, and that put him back into a good mood again. With drink in hand, he soon forgot about the debt he owed the small dwarf man for some while to come. Soon they were to depart for the road, for who knows where, and how long. And he was determined to make this a night to ease that pain. In his mind he hoped that one night would stretch to do it. He was wrong. He knew that deep down. The shadowy figure that had been sitting in the corner was nowhere to be seen. The candle was lit once more, as if it had never been out, and the glass of wine was tipped over on its side, its contents running out across the table with red drips of it splashing to the floor, beginning to puddle. Suddenly, the strange figure was at the back area that led out into the kitchen. He whispered something into a serving wench's ear, and she froze to the spot to let him past her, and a train of thought interrupted at, "Sorry, sir, but customers can't go out that way." For some time the serving wench stood there with wide open eyes, zoned out of reality somehow, seemingly unable to move from the spot. Eventually she came to her senses, prodded by the chef, the barman's wife, who was trying to get past her. She came to as if nothing had ever happened, and continued about her business. During these minutes of darkness outside, a dark, strange figure had emerged into the back alley behind the inn and moved swiftly down towards a wooden fence that was blocking access to this private alley. A locked door barred the way, but the figure did not care. He waited confidently as a wagon pulled up and parked on the other side of the fence. He then climbed onto a box, jumped onto another, and leapt with almost supernatural dexterity onto a third stacked yet higher than the rest. He grabbed the top of the fence and pulled himself deftly down onto the wagon, which he then calmly left down the passenger side. Authority showed in his walk as if he owned it. When he was clear of the vehicle, he quickly moved towards another alleyway and was out of sight. Very few people were around because of the downpour of rain, but any who were too concerned with getting soaked through to notice the strange way that the rain shimmered around the figure's body as he moved. As the sun rose once more, the rain began to settle down, as if it had finished its working shift to be replaced by daylight across the city. It was a particularly refreshing, heartening day, enough to uplift the spirits of every citizen in the great city of Altdorf, all except for one, that is, the man who was trudging menacingly along the cobbled streets of the docks quarter. His tall boots creaked as he walked. Their straps were tightened in place, and the buckles were polished immaculately. He wore a uniform that made the people around him gasp in astonishment at his approach, and then quickly move out of his way. His sword and pistol were visible to all, holstered quite plainly in sight, perhaps as a warning. He was a tall man, seemingly taller than anyone else on the streets that morning. That, or perhaps everyone else, felt smaller compared to him. The wide-brimmed tall hat he wore helped extend his menacing height further still. Even animals knew to stay away from him. Malvanius, witch hunter captain for the Emperor's city of Altdorf, was a man who got results, no matter what the cost may be. He was a believer in the old witch-hunter creed that punishing 10 innocents was far better than letting one guilty man go free. His face seemed to be in a permanent sneer. This was due to a facial muscle injury he had incurred some years ago when he was a soldier, fighting the orcs and goblins in the Emperor's armies. A rampaging orc big boss had brought him close to the gates of Moor when it sliced deeply into his face that fateful day. His jawbone had been righteous enough, though, to allow him to clamp his teeth down on the weapon, locking it in place long enough for his pole arm to sever the green beast's belly open, spilling its insides across the ground. Even then it didn't realize how dead it should be, and made to finish him off with its bare fists. Even when the brute died, after Malvanius had taken a further beating from the monster, its body fell towards him, seeking to finish him, seeking to push the blade all the way through his face and out the other side, seeking to test his resolve, and more importantly, his faith. Somehow he had reached his feet up in time and supported the weight of the dead brute long enough for another man in his company to pull it off of him. A great ally that man was. Some years later he caught up with him, and he'd been forced to put him to death for chaotic stigmata upon his skin. He admitted his swordmaster captain had been a great man. That is why he made his execution swift and on the spot. He executed him without even delivering the sentence. Last night, Malvanius had been summoned from his bedchamber to attend the site of a terrible crime. His division of men were already hard at work interrogating and seeking clues, but it was the nature of this crime that had called for Malvanius's presence more than anything. The last drops of rain hung from the end of his bent nose, as if clinging on to remain in existence for just a little while longer now the rain had stopped. The man came to a halt and brought out an embroidered handkerchief, with which he proceeded to blow his nose upon. In one corner were the markings of his family crest, and that of the Emperor in the opposite corner. The place he had stopped had brought his foot to rest upon a cigarette butt. He picked it up and smelled it suspiciously, putting it away in his long jacket. He had stopped at a particular inn. His eyes rose up to read the hanging sign. "The Two-Headed Goose! What blasphemy of creation! What chaotic mutant is this? It all makes sense now." He promptly walked into the bar area and made sure not to remove his hat. His long flowing cloak was wet, and he troubled himself enough to take it off and shake it across the bar floor. Those present stared in horror, absolute abject terror at seeing a witch hunter in the same room as them. It wouldn't matter that it was a public place. Witch hunters had the ability to decide upon law immediately. They were a law unto themselves, and worse still, this one was the captain of their zealous lot. One man lost his nerve at this and edged around Malvanius by the longest route he could find. Then when he reached the door, he bolted straight outside. Malvanius hadn't blinked an eye. Others looked hopeful, as if they too could get away with his action. Suddenly the man reappeared again, walking backwards through the door with a sword pointed at his throat, held up with a threatening certainty by one of Malvanius's witch hunters. Malvanius finally took the time out of his busy day to look at the scared man. "You're bone dry, and you arrived here only an hour ago. You had no reason to run from me, fool." The man's eyes widened first with surprise, and then hope took over. He asked, Does that mean I can go now, sir?" He coughed to cover up the wavering in his voice at the end of the sentence. Malvanius smiled at the man. It was an unnerving sight. Even though the smile was an attempt at being pleasant, the man's facial deformity made anything like that seem sinister. Of course it was sinister anyway, for a pleasant thought to him was unpleasant for anyone else.